everyone. Welcome to another episode of Convos with Sazón with yours truly. With me today is Fredy Peccerelli. He is the Executive Director of the Forensic Anthropology Foundation of Guatemala, as well as its sister organization, the Friends of FAFG. Welcome. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
So excited to have you. Obviously, I know you on a personal front, but we are here to talk about the very important work that you do. So to kick us off, what is your personal connection to forensic anthropology, and why did you originally choose to go that route?
Well, I grew up in New York. I'm originally Guatemalan, came here in 1980. And I decided to try to forget about Guatemala. And then when I was in Brooklyn College, I took a course that focused on two countries, South Africa and Guatemala. And that, after reading the book, Rigoberta Menchú, she was a Nobel Peace Prize winner, I sort of decided at that point that my life was going to be as a professor of anthropology, and I was going to spend archaeology, really. The summers digging in the ruins and the rest of the year teaching, Indiana Jones. So that was a little fantastical of me, but it was a plan. And so I decided to reconnect with Guatemala after that. And forensic anthropology was just a means. Initially, I wanted to be a doctor and found my way to anthropology and, visiting the Bronx Zoo and studying old civilizations, and then the human skeleton, and then digging. So it kind of all made sense. And then when I realized that this work could be put to use for the people of Guatemala, initially the people of Guatemala, eventually many more, but it just clicked. And so what I started doing is I started looking for a connection, and I found in Atlanta in 1994 at the American Anthropology Association meeting, Dr. Clyde Snow. Dr. Snow was Clyde, my mentor, was a forensic anthropologist from Oklahoma City. I think he lived in Norman. He lived in Norman, where the university is. He was a forensic anthropologist for Oklahoma City and also for Cook County in Chicago. And he had done all these incredible cases and the Oklahoma City bombing, and he had been in the Kennedy Commission to investigate the assassination. And he had also gone to Argentina, into Chile, into Guatemala to look for the disappeared. So when I found him in 94, I just approached him and I said, is there any way I can get involved? And he asked me where I was from. I said, I'm from Guatemala. He goes, interesting. And what do you do? Well, I'm in my last semester of anthropology and majoring in physical anthropology. And he said, okay, well, I'm teaching a course in January 1995 for the team. Before the foundation, there was a team, a forensic anthropology team. So I went down to Guatemala in 1995, took the course. They offered me a job, a temporary job. And then little by little, I just stayed longer and longer and completely and utterly fell in love with the people in the communities. Was completely taken by surprise by the amount of suffering and how alone these families were. And so the reality is that forensic anthropology was just a vehicle of me getting to a place where I could support or walk with the families in their search for the disappeared.
Yeah, and here we are 30 years later, the work is still as important as ever, right? We're going to get more into the work itself, but I'm curious to know why you felt at that point in time that you wanted to forget Guatemala, and what about forensic anthropology drew you so closely back?
Well, growing up in New York back then, there weren't many Guatemalans, and we left because we had to. My father received death threats, and so it was painful. My family didn't want to be here, and so I was stuck here. And a way of surviving was not to think about Guatemala so much, not to think about my grandparents or my friends or, playing marbles in the street, and instead just, becoming whatever New Yorker was, going to Yankee Stadium. We lived 4 blocks from Yankee Stadium the first year and a half, and playing skelsies in the street. And little by little, Guatemala just seemed in the distant past. Although, obviously it was there when I got home, and the food was there and the culture was there, but I wasn't living true to that anymore. And I wasn't listening to Spanish music. I wasn't watching Spanish TV. I wasn't playing soccer. Played baseball, played football, swam. I did everything that was as different as it could be from being Guatemalan at that time. Well, at least I thought so. And it's really interesting because on my way here, I passed by 2 pollo camperos.
Oh my gosh, I
Which-
love pollo campero.
Which I know, but I used to crave pollo campero back in the 80s,
Yeah.
and no one knew what I was talking about. And now, I see it there, and it says, founded in Guatemala in 1971. And it's weird to see that and to see how much things have changed. But forensic anthropology for me was a way of contributing. Learning the human skeleton is, when you do forensic anthropology, the idea is that you try to decipher the profile of the skeleton. Is it a man? Is it a woman? Are they tall? Are they short? And you try to compare that to the people you're searching for. You try to understand how the skeleton got to be the way it is. If there's any trauma, was it created by a machete wound? Was it created by a gunshot wound? Trying to understand the cause of death. And in doing that, you begin to become intimate with the crime, with the victims, and with the entirety of what happens in a place like Guatemala during so many years.
And you've started to hint at the work that you do, but for those who are unfamiliar with the foundation, what exactly is it that you guys do?
Well, the Forensic Anthropology Foundation of Guatemala is a nonprofit organization that we started with Clyde Snow and others in Guatemala in 1997. Initially, it started as an organization that did anthropology and archaeology and applied that to forensics, to investigation of crimes. Since then, we now have a multidisciplinary approach that has 6 steps. So the first would be it's the investigation portion. In other words, the attention to the families. We generate trust with the families, so the families can tell us everything about the person we're looking for. That's probably the most important, although I'm going to say that about every part, because that's exactly what makes it a multidisciplinary, integral system. But we need to understand who we're looking for. We need to understand the family of the person we're looking for, so we can understand if there are more victims in that family, who to sample, who to take DNA samples from, and also to gain an understanding of how this happened. Then forensic archaeology, it would be looking for the remains. And in most cases, in most countries, the remains are buried, because burying remains or burying bodies, it's the easiest way to get rid of a body, right? There's also throwing them in wells and throwing them in, natural holes, but usually digging up a hole and throwing bodies in it, it's fairly simple, quick, cheap, and it's it's easy to hide the bodies.
Yeah.
Our archaeologists are experts in finding those depressions and those hints on the surface that can lead us to finding those graves. Eventually, when we exhume the bodies, we bring them to our labs, and then we X-ray them, wash them, put them back together. The reconstructing the bodies can take some time, and then we begin the process of understanding if they're women, if they're men, if they're older or younger. We have recovered bodies of pregnant women with fetuses still in their abdomen.
Wow.
And then we have to make sure that we put those bodies together as well. Sometimes the bodies are cut into pieces, and we have to reconstruct them. We might find a grave just with the skulls, and the other grave just with the arms and legs, and another one just with the torsos. And it's important for us to understand that the process of identification begins at every point of the investigation. For example, with the bodies, this is where we begin the chain of custody for evidence, right? This is the moment where you tag that evidence, give it a number, and then that number follows the evidence all the way through. The evidence, I mean the body in that case, but also ropes, bullets, anything artifactual that can help us understand what happened. At that time, during the analysis, we also cut a piece of the femur, a piece of bone, and take a tooth for DNA extraction. And one of the things that have differentiated the FAFG is that we created our own DNA laboratory. The first one in Guatemala, the first one in Central America, I believe, and one of the first ones in all of Latin America. And we do now have the capacity, probably of nonprofit organizations, where there's 2 or 3 in the world that can process the amount of samples that we can process.
Wow.
And what that means is that we created a DNA laboratory that is completely focused on extracting DNA from the families, from the family samples,
Yeah.
and extracting DNA from the bones or the teeth of the bodies, and then comparing them. And this is where it kind of links back into New York, using software called Emphasis, the Mass Fatality Identification System, created at the request of the medical examiner's office in New York after the World Trade Center, right? After those 2 planes hit the buildings, the World Trade Center.
Yeah. 9/11.
They needed to identify those thousands, almost 3,000 bodies and many more thousands of fragments. So there wasn't software that could do that then. So this software was developed for that and then eventually donated to us. So we now manage our database using that software, which is incredible. It's amazing,
Yeah.
still today. And so we take the DNA profiles from the families and from the bodies, put them in the software, and then the software compares each body to each family, which is different than the way a criminal database works, right? Because in a criminal database, a DNA database, you have the DNA of the criminal.
Right. And they have to have been in the system prior, right?
Exactly. So if they're in the system, you find evidence at a scene, then you put it in the database, and when you get a hit, it's a match because it's that person's own DNA. In this case, we don't have the victim's DNA, so we have to build a comparison. So we build that comparison by using the families. So if we can get the mother, the father, the brothers and sisters, and the children, then all the possibilities are there, and the software calculates the possibility that that body fits in as the son of this woman, the son of this man, the brother of this man, the brother of this woman, the father of this little girl, the father of this little boy, and it tells you this one more than any other.
How much of a percentage, if you all work with percentages, is deemed to be a match?
We have to have 99.9.
Okay, so it's still as close to 100 as possible.
Yeah, I mean, in DNA, there's never going to be 100%, because the calculations are based on numbers that go beyond the amount of people that are in the world. But once we get over 99.9, we are certain, and we can call it an identification.
Okay.
But we do the work is very thorough, because we don't only use DNA. See, that's part of the understanding of this process. It is not a DNA-led process, because we can't get DNA unless we have trust from the families. We can't compare the body to the families unless we know the relationship of each sample to that victim.
Yeah.
We don't have the bones if we don't exhume them, if we don't find them in those hidden graves. We don't know what the probable profile of the body is unless we analyze them properly, or the cause of death.
Yeah.
For example, DNA cannot give you the cause of death. Only forensic anthropology can do that, or forensic medicine can do that by reconstructing the body and understanding. So that's why all these areas play against each other, or provide information that the others cannot. And even when there is a match in the database, we also have a process of confirmation of identification, where we review everything from the beginning, every single thing that we've done, every process that we've done, and then our Department of Confirmation presents it to a committee, and then the committee decides if it's an identification. Whether it's 99.9 or not, it still weighs everything else. Whether, for example, if there's a possibility that the victim has a brother that's also disappeared, doesn't matter if it's 99.9, because the brother is also going to be 99.9. It depends on the samples.
Got it.
So that's why if there are brothers, and we know that one of those brothers or both of those brothers have children, then we get their kids' DNA. Because the way it works, we're looking at nuclear DNA, so it's DNA that comes from your mother and from your father, 50%, right? So you're going to share a lot with your siblings or not much with your siblings, right? It really depends.
Fascinating. So that confirmation that you talked about in front of the committee, what numbered step is that of the 6 that you were describing?
That's number 5.
Okay.
So it's attention to families, forensic archaeology, forensic anthropology, forensic genetics, confirmation of identification, and then returning the bodies. And notification and returning the bodies is, again, very intimate,
Yeah.
and it's based on trust. So we don't wait. And, I usually, when I tell this, is also accepting that we make mistakes. And many years ago, we identified a man, and instead of going to tell his mother right away, it took us 2 or 3 months to finish the reports and, request the vehicle and get the per diems and, have team members that can go out to the town. And when they got there, the lady had passed away a week before. And so even though we did everything, we still failed. And so now what I do is I make sure that they go out within 48 hours and notify, even if nothing's ready, even if the reports aren't there, even if nothing's ready, but it's at least getting there to tell the family member we found them.
Trust, you've mentioned it a couple of times. I can't imagine how important it is, especially with something so sensitive, right? You're dealing with families who are looking for answers, families who either are in the grieving process or haven't started the grieving process because they don't know how to go about it. How does your team go about building trust?
Well, first it was being there in person, sitting down in people's homes, not forcing them to come to an office. And I think that's probably the most important. We go out to the towns. And what I mean to the towns, not only in Guatemala, we now work in many other countries. And we understand that it's important for us to get out there in that space, to go to someone's home and sit there and listen to everything that they want to tell us. Show us pictures, show us clothing, or show us an instrument that they used to play, or tell us stories about them. So it's not only about, just tell me what I want to hear so I can look for the person. It's really about empathy.
Of course.
And sitting there and absorbing some of that pain and some of that anguish. And that's hard. Like, if you ask me, that's probably the hardest thing we do, because even though it's the less technical, it is the most emotional. And the technical stuff is easy. You're usually alone in a lab with a skeleton or with some machines. But when you're in front of, a mother who's been looking for her son or her daughter for 40 years, and she thinks she sees you as hope to find them, that's a lot of responsibility, and there's also a lot of shared emotion.
Yeah. How do these families find you? Because I'm sure many who have had the opportunity to work with your organization is just a small fraction of those who exist that are still looking for answers, or they might not know that your foundation exists. So talk about that.
Well, in Guatemala, we have campaigns. We used to do newspapers, radios, TV ads, which is hard and really expensive. Now with social media, it helps more. We're out there more. There's an app called WhatsApp, which I know probably all of your audience, it's probably international and knows that app, but a lot of my friends in New York don't know the app.
It is very international, you're right.
So it's an international app, and in Guatemala, you can send messages and say, the FAFG is going to be around if you want to talk to us. So it's being, having flyers in the markets, being in the market radios, having those little tuk-tuks that are driving by with little speakers saying, if you have a disappeared loved one between 1960 and 1996, the FAFG is going to be here in the market. If you want to ask some questions, if you want to just talk to us, we'll be here. So it's trying to be out there all the time, but it's also by word of mouth.
Yeah.
A lot of times when we go to a community, there's a lot of attention. People come from neighboring communities and they wait to see, people are afraid to see if anything happens, anything bad happens. And when it doesn't, then they come and talk to us. And, there's 40,000 people disappeared in Guatemala. So we haven't identified, more than about 4,000, which is a lot.
It is a lot.
But it's still not, the overall number of victims is 200,000 between the dead and the disappeared in the Guatemalan conflict. So if you look at it by numbers, we are failing. But if you look at it by
Impact, though, to the
impact and the
families.
accompaniment of the families, because every one of those families that come to us has began a process, and it's still something we're trying to understand, because we have sometimes families come to us. I remember this old man who has now passed away. He was looking for his daughter for 35 years. Eventually he asked us many times about DNA, and eventually he gave a sample, and after he gave a sample, he told us, okay, I can now die in peace. And I was like, what do you mean? He goes, well, now I know that I'm going to be looking for my daughter even from the dead, even when I'm dead, even from the other side, because I gave you my DNA. So now that you have my essence, now that you have my body, and I can actively look for her, I'm at peace. And that's what it represents. And you see, for us here, it might not represent that. But for the families that are alone, it's even just taking somebody's name down means a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I truly can't imagine the pain and the search, the desperation for answers, right? Which is exactly what your foundation focuses on. What about managing that hope and the expectations that these families have? Because yes, coming to you all and building that initial relationship of trust is the first step, but you said it yourself, there is no guarantee that you will find the bodies. So talk about both the emotional aspect of dealing with that expectation setting, and then also what does that mean for your team in terms of, is there a point where you will have to make a call of, we've invested XYZ amount of resources. At what point do you stop, if at all?
Yeah, we'll never stop. Emotionally, I think there comes a point where you have to separate the pain from the action, right? And you said something earlier that was, you can't imagine what the pain is. I can't either. I've tried to for over 30 years, and no matter how much I try to put myself in that position or think I fully understand, there's only one way of understanding. That's if it happens to you. And so I don't ever want to fully understand.
Yeah, let's
right?
knock on wood.
And this is one of those things that you don't want to understand in life. And so you need to be open enough to know that each person in front of you is dealing with this, and it means something different to that person. And so, yes, sometimes we identify someone and we think, yes, we've done it, and that person isn't healed, closure doesn't happen, but we do begin to see the impact when they still come to the meetings, and they get happier even when somebody else is identified, and they're there as part of their life and their process. So I think overall, it's a process of understanding that some things that are broken cannot be fixed, and just these people have been in the search alone for such a long time that I think they understand that finding their loved one there's a very slim chance of it happening, but it's their duty to search. It's their duty to find them, no matter what. And I think in us, they find a partner in that search. So I think we don't ever stop, because we might find more graves, and those graves, that DNA from those new bodies might match the one we got from a family 20 years ago. That happens a lot. Or a family that hadn't heard of us gives a DNA sample, and within a month we have an identification because we had that body 20 years ago. So I think it's very difficult to put time constraints or limits, because we try to do as much as we can all the time. And I think the approach is, as in the name of that movie, everything, everywhere, all at once. And I think that's what we try to do. Everything, everywhere, all at once, all the time.
Yeah.
And sometimes we find people. A lot of times we find people, but we're not going to find them all. We know that, and the families know that. And so I think trust is based on that reality, right? It's not something spoken. It's something that you could see in people's eyes and you could hear in their voices, and that they know, and we know.
Yeah.
So we go together.
And like you said, that partnership, that collaboration, that unspoken about understanding that you all are just as committed as they are. And you said it yourself, they've been at this alone for so many years. Having a whole team behind them to help them in that process won't necessarily get rid of the pain or make it any easier. However, it's less lonely at a bare minimum. Let's talk about the other countries that you all are involved in. So Guatemala obviously being the first one.
Yeah, I mean, Guatemala is the basis for everything, is where we started, is the nucleus, is where, we owe ourselves to the families in Guatemala. They taught us everything. But now we've been working a lot in Mexico. We work in different states in Mexico: Tamaulipas, Coahuila, Sinaloa, dangerous places. There's thousands of people disappeared. Colombia. We work in Colombia with the UBPD, the Unit for the Search of the Disappeared. We work with the HEP, with the Jurisdicción Especial para la Paz. We work with the Instituto de Medicina Legal y Ciencias Forenses, which is, if you really look at all the efforts in the world, probably the most robust one is the one in Colombia. Colombia really does have resources and has created institutions, state institutions, to do this work. Unfortunately, the results are not what the families expect, and that's what we're there for, to show them what can be done when you have nothing, right? Because we're a nonprofit in a country that doesn't have a state approach, that, our governments don't support us. We don't get any funding. We don't get any help from Guatemalan, the Guatemalan state. And when you go to Colombia and you see these large organizations with funding, and we're like, okay, you guys should be doing a lot more with all this. And I think we always take the family side, and we go to civil society. So we go to communities in, Putumayo, in Cucuta, and all over the country, and we empower families so they know this is the way it should look. This is what they're supposed to be doing for you. And then together they can, the families are empowered, and the state institutions, they need to respond, right? And as I was coming here, I also received the message that we found another body. We, the UBPD, the HEP, and the FAFG in La Escombrera, which is a very famous case in Medellin, in La Comuna 13. And
I was there not too long ago.
We just found another body last night. I was at that site 12 years ago when it was just a mountain of rubble, and the families believed that there was 100 people buried under there. And we suggested some things that could be done. They weren't, but now they're doing them, and we're finding bodies together. So I think that's incredible. We've also been working in Syria now. We have 2 teams in Syria working in the northeast, and also working in the recently freed area that was under the Assad regime. And so we're working not only with 2 civil society organizations, SJAC, which is the Syrian Justice and Accountability Center, but also the White Helmets, which is an organization of heroes that they recover the bodies after bombing. And we're training them to be able to do this work forensically, right? And at least the recovery part, and then eventually, hopefully, the part about identification. But also we're working with the IIMP, which is the Independent Institution for Missing Persons, which is the only United Nations organization created by family members to search for the disappeared, which is really interesting. We just had 12 of their members in Guatemala for 10 days of training with us. So we're doing that a lot. Basically, what we do is share our Guatemalan experience, our Guatemalanness, if you want to call it that. And we take people to meet our family members, and we take them to see our memorials, and we we tell them about all of our failures and some of our successes. And we do, and I'm a true believer that if we can do it in Guatemala, it can be done anywhere. I mean, we really had nothing, nothing. So we're also working with the Rohingya community. They fled Burma to Bangladesh, and they're in it used to be, I don't know if it still is, but it used to be the largest refugee camp in the world, in a town called Cox's Bazar in the Bangladeshi side, and there's 1 million Rohingya there. So what we did is we trained 40 of them in 4 different refugee camps. We have community centers, and they are taking DNA samples. They're interviewing family members, and we have now collected over 4,000 samples, and we're creating a family DNA database. Now, we don't have access to the bodies yet, right? Because the bodies are in Burma.
Mm-hmm.
And Burma is led by a military junta, so can't get to the bodies. But that's what Syria was like till November, right?
Mm-hmm.
So things change, and not preparing ourselves for those changes is a mistake. And so, Sri Lanka is another place we're working. Sudan, we've made a couple of trips to Uganda to speak to Sudanese refugees. Hopefully we'll be working in Ethiopia soon. There's a small project there. But we also have probably one of our best projects is called the Global Forensic Academy. And in the next couple of months, we're going to be putting all of them together, about 30 people from 16 different countries, South Korea, Philippines, Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Nigeria, Sudan, Liberia, bringing them together in Rwanda to go through all of the theory of forensics, and then also to visit memorials in Rwanda and visit a community of a reconciliation community, which is really interesting in Rwanda. But then next year, we bring them all to Guatemala for 17 days of practice, and they get to interview family members, exhume graves, analyze the remains, process their own DNA in the labs. And we're not training experts. It's not, the work is not about creating experts. It's about creating understanding that the work exists, that there is a path forward. Even when you think there's nothing you can do, there is something you can do, right? And again, writing somebody's name down, writing the location, taking a picture, it all helps.
I love the theme of paying it forward through your training, through sharing what's worked, sharing what hasn't, knowledge sharing at the end of the day. And I'm curious to know, what does it take behind the scenes to expand to all of these countries? Do you have to talk to the governments first? Do they contact you? Once you actually get through that first step, how does training work? Talk about scaling these efforts.
It's hard.
Yeah.
Again, trust building. Right? And I think for us...
funding, right?
Yeah. I mean, I do have to recognize that without the State Department, the U.S. State Department, we would not be working in all these countries. The funding for the work, the international work of the FAFG, all came through funding of the State Department. So it was initially a phone call asking if we can speak to either a family member or a commissioner, and inviting us to share the experience. And that initial conversation then turned into what can be done. And later that turned into projects, and that turned into resources, and that turned into this large-scale sharing project, which has led us to today. And it's incredible that what the U.S. has been able to do through foreign aid. And I hope it continues.
Yeah, me too. What would you say are some common misconceptions about the work that you do?
I think the biggest one is that all forensics is the same, right? Because every country has a traditional forensic system, right? Every country has medical examiners and detectives of some sort, and people that go out to crime scenes. The biggest misconception is to think that traditional system can identify thousands of victims from political upheaval, from conflicts, from the state disappearing individuals, and that families don't play a role. I think that's the other big misconception. So when we go in and we say, okay, this is different than forensics, than traditional forensics. Everything that traditional forensics doesn't work here, right? Here, we have to make sure that we have one system that not only searches, but also identifies.
Yeah.
That not only asks questions, but provides answers. right? That brings families not only to the center, but has families leading the efforts. And I think when you present that, it's not easy initially, and I think that's what's hard about working internationally, because a lot of times, coming from Guatemala, again, we don't have a search commission in Guatemala, and they do in Colombia, and they do in Mexico, and they do in Sri Lanka, and they do now in Syria, and these commissions all search, but they don't identify, because they rely on the traditional forensic systems to identify. That's why I think the best example of what things probably should look like under these circumstances are what we did in Coahuila in Mexico, or in Guadalajara in Mexico, which is we, together with the governors of those states of Coahuila and Jalisco, together with search commissions and traditional forensic systems, we asked for resources, labs, and personnel to be completely isolated from all the other cases. So we created FAFGs within state institutions with their own resources, their own DNA labs, their own investigators, and train them to understand how important the families are, to understand how important dignity is, to understand how important trust is.
Your work, you've already spoken to where, you work all over the world, Guatemala as well as international tribunals as well. What would you say is a common thread between post-conflict conflict resolution or investigations more so than anything?
I think the biggest threat is that this happens to marginalized communities, and no one cares. So when I look into the eyes of the women in Sri Lanka, or the Rohingya women in Bangladesh, or the Syrian widows, or the Guatemalan widows, they're all the same. And that's another threat. The fact that most of the people that are victims, not all, but most, are men.
Wow, I'm actually very surprised to know that.
And that means that who searches the women? Women search. So the women are the power behind this. It's in every country we work, the women are the ones that, without their husbands, without their sons, bring the rest of the children and go search. They go look in hospitals, they go look in jails, detention centers, and cemeteries. They're the ones that, for their entire life, do nothing but search for the loved ones. And I think that's another common thread. The other is that, there is a state answer, and then there's a human one, right? And I think those two don't necessarily align. And yes, it's good to have reparation programs, but it's also good to listen to people. Yes, it's good to acknowledge things happen, but it's probably better to do things so they don't happen again, right? It's the lack of recognition of the structural issues that created these conditions, right? So if these communities continue to be marginalized, and if we continue to see them as the other, less important, this is always going to continue to happen everywhere.
And they're going to feel that too.
Yeah, they are going to feel that. And it's going to happen everywhere. When we started this work, we really did think that we were going to put ourselves out of work. That's what we hoped to be doing. That every person we identified, it meant we were going to have less work. And eventually there would be no more disappeared people. Unfortunately now, the FAFG is a permanent organization that hopes to be able to continue this work and bring it everywhere where there are families that are alone in their search. And so we hope that we can be there to accompany them, but it's also sad that we need organizations like the FAFG.
Let's talk about the No More Missing campaign, which aims to raise global awareness about the work that you're doing, and what you hope people take away from not only knowing about the work, but knowing the significance of the stories behind the numbers of the disappeared.
Yeah, the No More Missing campaign, the idea behind this is that we look in the mirror and imagine, what if it happened to me? What would you do? Or what would you expect to be done if it did happen to you? And I think that, for me, that is my philosophy. I try to do everything, everywhere, all at once, because that's what I would expect if it happened to me. I'm rooted in my family, and my kids are everything to me. And anyone knows me can tell you that that's the biggest driver of my life. And I can't imagine something happening to them. I can't. I stop myself when I do. And then I think, what each one of these families must go through. And so I do what I can and more. And so the idea is to get people to understand that this didn't happen to them. It happened to us. And that we need help, right, in doing this work. That eventually, because of the way we're structured, we've gotten to where we are today because we've been funded by international governments and projects. But we haven't been funded by individuals. Maybe because we didn't have to go out to the public, but we do now. And I think the idea behind this is that if we can get people to understand how important not this work is, or not how important the FAFG is, how important it is to every family that has a disappeared loved one, that there's someone out there looking for them, then maybe you and everyone can help a little bit. And we can continue to make sure that the FAFG, the new generation of the FAFG, because again, I've been doing this for 30 years and, my knees kind of hurt. But there's a lot of young Guatemalans and young Mexicans and young Colombians and young Syrians and all the people that have been through the Forensic Academy. There's a lot of people now that know how to do this. We just need to be able to, raise the right resources and help to make sure that we establish something that can last for as long as it needs to last.
In addition to, of course, helping with the funding, what other ways can people get involved and support the work that you do, whether it's here in the U.S. or internationally?
Well, I mean, one is by recognizing that this is a global issue and that we should pay attention to it. That's one. And I think that you can do by sharing, right? Sharing what's happening. And we're trying now to bring personal stories into light, and we're hoping that those stories can be shared. I mean, there was we contributed with the filming of a documentary called Finding Oscar, which is a story of one boy, two boys actually, that survived a massacre in Guatemala, and one of them is in Canada, and the other one is here in Framingham, Massachusetts. And they were taken by the perpetrators, who killed over 250 people in the community, babies, their entire families, in front of them. And they took them because we think they were good-looking little boys with light eyes. And two officers decided that they were going to keep them, as one as a servant and the other as his son. And eventually, one fled, and the other one, that officer that took him, died. And so eventually he came to the U.S. and grew up believing that his father was a war hero. And then later, when we found his biological father wasn't there the day of the massacre, the day they killed his mother and 8 brothers and sisters, he came, gave us a DNA sample, and then eventually we found him here in Framingham. And I went up there, took his sample, and it was him. It was Oscar. And I can't imagine what it must be like to believe that your father was this person, and then to learn that he had actually contributed to the killing of your entire family. Telling those stories, I think, helps to understand how complicated this is, right? And it's very complicated. And so I think that's how people can get involved. They can get involved by reaching out to us, volunteering, visiting us in Guatemala.
What's your website?
Donating, FAFG.org.
Okay, everybody write it down.
FAFG.org. Yeah, I mean, hopefully we can put a QR code somewhere. And,
Yeah.
and also Friends of FAFG, right? .org. Sharing, supporting, telling, and acknowledging. I think they're the ways that you can help. I came out of a public university, and I was the treasurer. I remember in my anthropology club in Brooklyn College, and I remember that we had a budget and we had to do activities. I hope one day we can create Friends of FAFG clubs in universities, so we can have those clubs and help, again, raise awareness. Organize trips, help us fundraise. Invite us over to the universities to talk, or family members to come and talk. I mean, there's a lot that can be done.
What do you think needs to happen for this type of work? I mean, I don't want to put you out of a job. However, for this type of work to not be as necessary anymore, like, do you think there is a long-term solution for getting rid of these disappeared cases? Or is that too idealistic of a question?
No, I think it's a question we have to ask ourselves, but I think the answer that I've come up with is that I'm never going to be out of a job, unfortunately. The more I learn of the world and of the injustices and of the tyranny and of the things that we are willing to do to others for power, the more I'm certain that this is going to continue to happen. Yeah. And instead of less, I think more. And so we have to create a more robust answer. And yes, hopefully someday we can have no more missing or no more disappeared, or hopefully someday we can see each other as each other instead of as the other. But we're not there yet.
Yeah.
And unless the newer generations, the younger generations begin to really understand that violence is not the way, and this is not going to go away.
Yeah. What legacy do you want to leave? Not only you as Fredy Peccerelli, but also through this foundation. What do you want people to think about when it comes to the very important work that you're doing?
I think for me, the most important thing is the legacy of there's always something you can do, right? There's always something you can do. And the science is great, but it's just a tool. It takes the will, it takes trust, it takes treating people with dignity. And so I think the most important thing for me is that, if you're willing to walk with another person that's going through a hard time and just sitting there, sometimes just quietly acknowledging that this is hard and that by you being there, it's already doing a lot. Writing somebody's name. I live around DC now, and I always like going down to the Vietnam Memorial. I know the memorial. I know what it means. I know those 58,000 soldiers. I have my best friend's father fought in Vietnam, and I saw pictures when I was young in Brooklyn. But when I go to that memorial and I see family members now much older, they take a paper and they put a pencil over it and they take the name. That name means a lot. And so we recreated. Obviously, we can't recreate the Vietnam Memorial. We don't have the resources to do that. But we do have a memorial in Guatemala where we put over 6,000 names on stone slabs. So, people go there and they look for their family's name. And we need to do more. But I think memorialization is also part of it, right? Remembering that these things really happened. Forgetting is not an option. I mean, when they say we need to learn from history, otherwise it repeats itself. This is the perfect example of, history repeating and repeating and repeating. It's almost like Groundhog's Day, right? Of the worst kind. And so writing a person's name down is important. For me, though, my biggest legacy is creating a better world for my kids. Again, it always goes back to my kids. For me, that's my ego-centric benefit from all this. That every time we tell a story, it creates, in some way and somehow, a better world for my kids. And they have, all three of them have grown up in this, and they know what this means. And I hope that someday they can also help maybe not looking for disappeared people, but help. Just help someone. That's their legacy.
I know they already are.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time. I consider me an ally, a friend of the foundation. I'm committed not only in spreading, obviously, awareness about what you all do, but in helping however much I can. And thank you and your team for the work. Honestly, I know how important it is. And the goal here is for others to also know and to support in however they can.
Thank you so much, Cata. It's a pleasure.
Bye, everyone. Until next time.